Libertarian conservatism, also known as conservative libertarianism or conservatarianism, is a political philosophy that combines conservatism and libertarianism, representing the libertarian wing of conservatism and vice versa. Libertarian conservatism advocates the greatest possible economic liberty and the least possible government regulation of social life, mirroring laissez-faire classical liberalism, but it harnesses this to a belief in a more social conservative philosophy emphasizing authority and duty. One originating and developing in the United States, libertarian conservatism prioritizes liberty, promoting free expression, freedom of choice and free market capitalism to achieve conservative ends and rejects liberal social engineering. Libertarian conservatism can also be understood as promoting civil society through conservative institutions and authority, such as family, country, religion and education, in the libertarian quest to reduce state power. 3 Contents 1 Philosophy 1.1 Economics 2 Notable people 3 See also 4 References 4.1 Sources 5 External links Philosophy and political science. The term libertarian conservatism refers to ideologies that combine the advocacy of economic principles such as fiscal discipline, respect for contracts, defense of private property and free markets and the traditionalist conservative stress on self-help and freedom of choice under a laissez-faire and economically liberal capitalist society with social tenets such as the importance of religion and the value of religious morality 5, through a framework of limited, constitutional, representative government. 6. For Margaret Randall, libertarian conservatism began as an expression of individualism and the demand for personal freedom. 7-8 Freedom and Virtue, the Conservative, Libertarian Debate, edited by George W. Carey, contains essays which describe the tension between liberty and morality as the main fault line dividing the two philosophies. 9 Nelson Hultberg wrote that there is philosophical common ground between libertarians and conservatives. According to Hultberg, the true conservative movement was, from the start, a blend of political libertarianism, cultural conservatism, and non-interventionism abroad bequeathed to us via the Founding Fathers. He said that such libertarian conservatism was hijacked by neoconservatism, by the very enemies it was formed to fight, Fabians, New Dealers, welfarists, progressives, globalists, interventionists, militarists, nation builders, and all the rest of the collectivist ilk that was assiduously working to destroy the Founders' Republic of States. 10 Thomas D. Lorenzo wrote that libertarian conservative constitutionalists believe that the way to limit government is to enforce the United States Constitution. However, D. Lorenzo criticized them by writing, "The fatal flaw in the thinking of the libertarian, conservative constitutionalists stems from their unawareness or willful ignorance of how the founders themselves believed the Constitution could be enforced, by the citizens of the free, independent, and sovereign states, not the federal judiciary." He wrote that the powers accrued to the federal government during the American Civil War overthrew the Constitution of 1787. 11 In the 1950s, Frank Meyer, a prominent contributor to the National Review, called his own combination of libertarianism and conservatism fusionism. 12-13 In the 1990s, Lou Rockwell, Murray Rothbard and others described their libertarian conservative views as paleo-libertarianism. 14. They continued libertarian opposition to all forms of government intervention, economic, cultural, social, international, but also upholding cultural conservatism in social thought and behavior. They opposed a licentious libertarianism which advocated freedom from bourgeois morality and social authority. 14. Rockwell later stated that they dropped that self-description because people confused it with paleoconservatism which they rejected. 15-16 California Governor Ronald Reagan appealed to American libertarians in a 1975 interview with Reason when he said, "I believe the very heart and soul of conservatism is libertarianism." 17. However, President Reagan turned the United States' big trade deficit into debt, and the United States became a debtor nation for the first time since World War I under the Reagan administration. 1819 Edward Feser emphasized that libertarianism does not require individuals to reject traditional conservative values. Libertarianism supports the ideas of liberty, privacy, and ending the war on marijuana at the legal level without changing personal values. 12 Economics. Libertarian conservatism subscribes to the libertarian idea of free market capitalism, advocating minimal to no government interference in the market. A number of libertarian conservatives favor Austrian economics and are critical of fiat money. Libertarian conservatives also support wherever possible privatizing services traditionally run or provided by the government, from airports and air traffic control systems to toll roads and toll booths. 2 Notable people: Friedrich Hayek, Ludwig von Mises, Milton Friedman, Richard Posner, Walter E. Williams, Richard Epstein, Thomas Sowell and Albert J. Nock have been described as libertarian conservatives. 220 Former Congressman Ron Paul and his son Senator Rand Paul have been described as combining conservative and libertarian small government ideas and showing how the Constitution of the United States defends the individual and most libertarian views. 21 Peter Breggin, an American psychiatrist and critic of shock treatment and psychiatric medication, is a self-described conservative libertarian. Right libertarianism, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, also known as libertarian capitalism 6, or right-wing libertarianism, 1, 7, is a political philosophy and type of libertarianism that supports capitalist property rights and defends market distribution of natural resources and private property. 8. The term right libertarianism is used to distinguish this class of views on the nature of property and capital. 9. From left libertarianism, a type of libertarianism that combines self-ownership with an egalitarian approach to natural resources. 10. In contrast to socialist libertarianism, 4. Right libertarianism supports free market capitalism. 1. Like most forms of libertarianism, it supports civil liberties, 1, especially natural law, 11, negative rights 12, and a major reversal of the modern welfare state. 13. Like libertarians of all varieties, right libertarians refer to themselves simply as libertarians. 237. Being the most common type of libertarianism in the United States. 4. Right libertarianism has become the most common referent of libertarianism. 1415. Since the late 20th century, while historically and elsewhere 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, it continues to be widely used to refer to anti-state forms of socialism such as anarchism 22, 23, 24, 25, and more generally libertarian communism, libertarian Marxism and libertarian socialism. 1626, around the time of Murray Rothbard, who popularized the term libertarian in the United States during the 1960s, anarcho-capitalist movements started calling themselves libertarian, leading to the rise of the term right libertarian to distinguish them. Rothbard himself acknowledged the co-opting of the term and boasted of its capture from the enemy. 16. Right libertarian political thought is characterized by the strict priority given to liberty, with the need to maximize the realm of individual freedom and minimize the scope of public authority. 27. Right libertarians typically see the state as the principal threat to liberty. This anti-statism differs from anarchist doctrines in that it is based upon an uncompromising individualism that places little or no emphasis upon human sociability or cooperation. 227-28. Right libertarian philosophy is also rooted in the ideas of individual rights and laissez-faire economics. The right libertarian theory of individual rights generally stresses self-ownership and that people have an absolute entitlement to the property that their labor produces. 27. Economically, right libertarians make no distinction between capitalism and free markets and view any attempt to dictate the market process as counterproductive, emphasizing the mechanisms and self-regulating nature of the market whilst portraying government intervention and attempts to redistribute wealth as invariably unnecessary and counterproductive. 27. Although all right libertarians oppose government intervention, there is a division between anarcho-capitalists, who view the state as an unnecessary evil and want property rights protected without statutory law through market-generated tort, contract and property law, and minarchists, who recognize the necessary need for a minimal state, often referred to as a night watchman state, to provide its citizens with courts, the military and the police. 3. While influenced by classical liberal thought, with some viewing right libertarianism as an outgrowth or as a variant of it, 29, there are significant differences. Edwin van der Haar argues that confusingly, in the United States the term libertarianism is sometimes also used for or by classical liberals. But this erroneously masks the differences between them. 30. Classical liberalism refuses to give priority to liberty over order and therefore does not exhibit the hostility to the state which is the defining feature of libertarianism. 27. As such, right libertarians believe classical liberals favor too much state involvement. 31. Arguing that they do not have enough respect for individual property rights and lack sufficient trust in the workings of the free market and its spontaneous order leading to support of a much larger state. 31. Right libertarians also disagree with classical liberals as being too supportive of central banks and monetarist policies. 32. Contents 1. Definition 2. Terminology 2.1 Old Right 3. Philosophy 3.1 Non-aggression principle 3.2 Property rights 3.3 State 3.4 Taxation as theft 4 Schools of thought 4.1 Anarcho-capitalism 4.2 Conservative libertarianism 4.3 Minarchism 4.4 Neoclassical liberalism 4.5 Neolibertarianism 4.6 Paleo-libertarianism 4.7 Propertarianism 5 By country 5.1 United Kingdom 5.2 United States 6 See also 7 References 8 Bibliography Definition See also, Definition of Anarchism and Libertarianism An economic group diagram in which right libertarianism falls within libertarian capitalism as right libertarians oppose state capitalism, supporting instead laissez-faire economics within capitalism. People described as being left libertarian or right libertarian generally tend to call themselves simply libertarians and refer to their philosophy as libertarianism. As a result, some authors and political scientists classify the forms of libertarianism into 2 groups, 33-34, namely left libertarianism and right libertarianism, 1 2 3 4 7. To distinguish libertarian views on the nature of property and capital. 9. Traditionally, libertarian was a term coined by the French libertarian communist Joseph de Gic 22 23 35 36 37, to mean a form of left-wing politics that has been frequently used to refer to anarchism 2 18 22 23, and libertarian socialism 20, since the mid to late 19th century. 24-25. With the modern development of right libertarian ideologies such as anarcho-capitalism and minarchism co-opting 16-17-19, the term libertarian in the mid-20th century to instead advocate laissez-faire capitalism and strong private property rights such as in land, infrastructure and natural resources. 38. The terms left libertarianism and right libertarianism have been used more often as to differentiate between the two. 2-3. Socialist libertarianism 39, has been included within a broad left libertarianism 40-41-42, while right libertarianism mainly refers to laissez-faire capitalism such as Murray Rothbard's anarcho-capitalism and Robert Nozick's minarchism. 237. Right libertarianism has been described as combining individual freedom and opposition to the state, with strong support for free markets and private property. Property rights have been the issue that has divided libertarian philosophies. According to Jennifer Carlson, right libertarianism is the dominant form of libertarianism in the United States. Right libertarians see strong private property rights as the basis for freedom and thus are To quote the title of Brian Doherty's text on libertarianism in the United States, Radicals for Capitalism. For Herbert Kitchelt and Anthony J. McGann contrast right libertarianism, a strategy that combines pro-market positions with opposition to hierarchical authority, support of unconventional political participation, and endorsement of feminism and of environmentalism with right authoritarianism. 43-44 Mark Bevey holds that there are three types of libertarianism, namely left, right and consequentialist libertarianism as promoted by Friedrich Hayek. 45 The Nolan Chart. According to contemporary American libertarian Walter Block, left libertarians and right libertarians agree with certain libertarian premises, but where they differ is in terms of the logical implications of these founding axioms. 46. Although some libertarians may reject the political spectrum, especially the left-right political spectrum, 147, 48, 49, 50, right libertarianism and several right-oriented strands of libertarianism in the United States have been described as being right-wing, 51, new right 52, 53, or radical right 43, 44, and reactionary. 1354 American libertarian activist and politician David Nolan, the principal founder of the Libertarian Party, developed what is now known as the Nolan Chart to replace the traditional left-right political spectrum. The Nolan Chart has been used by several modern American libertarians and right libertarians who reject the traditional political spectrum for its lack of inclusivity and see themselves as north of center. It is used in an effort to quantify typical libertarian views that support both free markets and social liberties and reject what they see as restrictions on economic and personal freedom imposed by the left and the right, respectively. 55, although this later point has been criticized. 56. Other libertarians reject the separation of personal and economic liberty, or that the Nolan Chart gives no weight to foreign policy. 57 Since the resurgence of neoliberalism in the 1970s, right libertarianism has spread beyond North America via think tanks and political parties. 58-59 In the United States, libertarianism is increasingly viewed as this capitalist free market position. 60-61 Terminology is a term. Right libertarianism is used by some political analysts, academics and media sources, especially in the United States, to describe the libertarian philosophy which is supportive of free market capitalism and strong private property rights, in addition to supporting limited government and self-ownership. 62. Being contrasted with left-wing views which do not support the former. In most of the world, this particular political position is mostly known as classical liberalism, economic liberalism and neoliberalism. 63. It is mainly associated with right-wing politics, support for free markets and private ownership of capital goods. Furthermore, it is usually contrasted with similar ideologies such as social democracy and social liberalism which generally favor alternative forms of capitalism such as mixed economies, state capitalism and welfare capitalism. 64-65 Peter Valentine writes that libertarianism, defined as being about self-ownership, is not a right-wing doctrine in the context of the typical left-right political spectrum because on social issues it tends to be left-wing, opposing laws restricting consensual sexual relationships between or drug use by adults as well as laws imposing religious views or practices and compulsory military service. He defines right libertarianism as holding that unowned natural resources may be appropriated by the first person who discovers them, mixes her labor with them, or merely claims them, without the consent of others, and with little or no payment to them. He contrasts this with left libertarianism, where such unappropriated natural resources belong to everyone in some egalitarian manner. 15. Similarly, Charlotte and Lawrence Becker maintain that right libertarianism most often refers to the political position that because natural resources are originally unowned, they may be appropriated at will by private parties without the consent of, or owing to, others. 66 Samuel Edward Conkin III, who characterized agorism as a form of left libertarianism. 67-68 and strategic branch of left-wing market anarchism. 69, defined right libertarianism as an activist, organization, publication or tendency which supports parliamentarianism exclusively as a strategy for reducing or abolishing the state, typically opposes counter-economics, either opposes the Libertarian Party or works to drag it right and prefers coalitions with supposedly free market conservatives. 70 Anthony Gregory maintains that libertarianism can refer to any number of varying and at times mutually exclusive political orientations, while holding that the important distinction for libertarians is not left or right, but whether they are government apologists who use libertarian rhetoric to defend state aggression. He describes right libertarianism as having and maintaining interest in economic freedom, preferring a conservative lifestyle, viewing private business as a great victim of the state and favoring a non-interventionist foreign policy, sharing the old right's opposition to empire. 71 While the defining characteristic of some kinds of right libertarianism is cultural or social conservatism, Kevin Carson has coined the term vulgar libertarianism to describe a different variety of right libertarianism, one which involves the use of libertarian rhetoric in capitalist apologetics. Carson uses vulgar libertarianism to refer to the use of talk about what could be expected in a genuinely free market to justify some or all of actually existing capitalism, which according to Carson is distorted by state-secured privilege and lacks many of the defining features of a free market. Carson derives this phrase from Karl Marx's vulgar political economy, a style of economic reasoning that deliberately becomes increasingly apologetic and makes strenuous attempts to talk out of existence the ideas which contain the contradictions evident in economic life. 72. Carson treats vulgar libertarianism as a tendency within much right libertarian writing rather than a category into which any figure could be thought to fit on all occasions. He has claimed to find it in the work of such authors as Eamon Butler and Madsen Pirie of the Adam Smith Institute, as well as on occasion the writings of others including Radley Borko, Milton Friedman and Ludwig von Mises. 73 Old Right. See also, Old Right, United States. Murray Rothbard, whose writings and personal influence helped create some strands of right libertarianism. 74, wrote about the Old Right in the United States, a loose coalition of individuals formed in the 1930s to oppose the New Deal at home and military interventionism abroad. He wrote that they did not describe or think of themselves as conservatives, they wanted to repeal and overthrow, not conserve. 75. Bill Kaufman has also written about such old right libertarians. 76 individuals who are seen in this old right libertarian tradition. 75, 77, 78. Include Frank Chodorow, 79-80, John T. Flynn, 81-82, Garrett, 83-84, Rose Wilder Lane, 85-86, H. L. Mencken, 87, Albert J. Nock 88-89-90, and Isabel Pattison, 91-92. What those thinkers had in common was opposition to the rise of the managerial state during the Progressive era and its expansion in connection with the New Deal and the Fair Deal, whilst challenging imperialism and military interventionism. 93. However, Old Right was a label about which many or most of these figures might have been skeptical, as most thought of themselves effectively as classical liberals rather than the national defense and social conservatism of thinkers associated with the later movement Conservatism, with Chodorow famously writing, "As for me, I will punch anyone who calls me a conservative in the nose. I am a radical." 94, 95, 96. Their opposition and resistance to the state approached philosophical anarchism with Nock and amounted to statelessness in Chodorow's case. 76. On the other hand, Lew Rockwell and Jeffrey Tucker identifies the old right as being culturally conservative, arguing that the vigorous social authority, as embodied in the family, church, and other mediating institutions, is a bedrock of the virtuous society, and that the egalitarian ethic is morally reprehensible and destructive of private property and social authority. 97. In the 1960s, Rothbard started publishing Left and Right, a journal of libertarian thought, believing that the left-right political spectrum had gone entirely askew since conservatives were sometimes more statist than liberals and tried to reach out to leftists and go beyond left and right. 98. In 1971, Rothbard wrote about right libertarianism, which he described as supporting free trade, property rights and self-ownership. 1. He would later describe it as anarcho-capitalism 99 100 101, and paleo-libertarianism. 102-103 Philosophy, part of a series on libertarianism in the United States. The Burning Torch, a symbol commonly associated with libertarianism in the United States. Origins show concepts, show schools, show theory, show economics, show people, show history, show issues, show culture, show organizations, show works, show related topics, show 2006 AE Gold Proof obf.png Libertarianism portal Yellow Flag Waving.svg Liberalism portal Right libertarianism developed in the United States in the mid-20th century from the works of European liberal writers like John Locke, Friedrich Hayek and Ludwig von Mises, and is the most popular conception of libertarianism in the United States today. 104, it is commonly referred to as a continuation or radicalization of classical liberalism. 105-106, the most important of these early right libertarian philosophers were modern American libertarians, such as Robert Nozick and Murray Rothbard. 2. Although often sharing the left libertarian advocacy for social freedom, right libertarians also value the social institutions that enforce conditions of capitalism while rejecting institutions that function in opposition to these on the grounds that such interventions represent unnecessary coercion of individuals and abrogation of their economic freedom. 107. Anarcho-capitalists 108-109, seek complete elimination of the state in favor of private defense agencies, while minarchists defend night watchman states which maintain only those functions of government necessary to safeguard natural rights, understood in terms of self-ownership or autonomy. 110 Right libertarians are economic liberals of either the Austrian school, majority, or the Chicago School of Economics, minority, and support laissez-faire capitalism, which they define as the free market in opposition to state capitalism and interventionism. 111 Right libertarianism and its individualism have been discussed as part of the new right in relation to neoliberalism and Thatcherism. 53. In the 20th century, new right liberal conservatism influenced by right libertarianism marginalized other forms of conservatism. 112 The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy describes right libertarian philosophy as follows: libertarianism is often thought of as right-wing doctrine. This, however, is mistaken for at least two reasons. First, on social, rather than economic, issues, libertarianism tends to be left-wing. It opposes laws that restrict consensual and private sexual relationships between adults, for example, gay sex, non-marital sex, and deviant sex, laws that restrict drug use, laws that impose religious views or practices on individuals, and compulsory military service. Second, in addition to the better-known version of libertarianism, right libertarianism, there is also a version known as left libertarianism. Both endorse full self-ownership, but they differ with respect to the powers agents have to appropriate unappropriated natural resources, land, air, water, etc. 15 Right libertarians are distinguished from the dominant libertarian tradition by their relation to property and capital. While both libertarianism and right libertarianism share general antipathy towards power by government authority, the latter exempts power wielded through free market capitalism. Historically, libertarians, such as Herbert Spencer and Max Stirner, supported the protection of an individual's freedom from powers of government and private ownership. While condemning governmental encroachment on personal liberties, right libertarians support freedoms on the basis of their agreement with private property rights, and the abolishment of public amenities is a common theme in right libertarian writings. 9 113. While associated with free market capitalism, right libertarianism is not opposed in principle to voluntary egalitarianism and socialism. 114 115. However, right libertarians believe that their advocated economic system would prove superior and that people would prefer it to socialism. 116 117. For Nozick, it does not imply support of capitalism, but merely that capitalism is compatible with libertarianism. 118. Something which is rejected by anti-capitalist libertarians. 119 120 121 122. According to Stephen Metcalf, Nozick expressed serious misgivings about capitalism, going so far as to reject much of the foundations of the theory on the grounds that personal freedom can sometimes only be fully actualized via a collectivist politics and that wealth is at times justly redistributed via taxation to protect the freedom of the many from the potential tyranny of an overly selfish and powerful few. 123. Nozick suggested that citizens who are opposed to wealth redistribution which fund programs they object to should be able to opt out by supporting alternative government-approved charities with an added 5% surcharge. 124. Nonetheless, Nozick did not stop from self-identifying as a libertarian in a broad sense. 125. And Julian Sanchez has argued that his views simply became more nuanced. 126. Non-aggression principle. Main article, Non-aggression principle. The non-aggression principle, NAP, is often described as the foundation of several present-day libertarian philosophies, including right libertarianism. 127 128 129 130 131. The NAP is a moral stance which forbids actions that are inconsistent with capitalist private property and property rights. It defines aggression and initiation of force as violation of these rights. The NAP and property rights are closely linked since what constitutes aggression depends on what it is considered to be one's property. 132. While the principle has been used rhetorically to oppose policies such as military drafts, taxation and victimless crime laws, use of the NAP as a justification for right libertarianism has been criticized as circular reasoning and as a rhetorical obfuscation of the coercive nature of right libertarian property law enforcement because the principle redefines aggression in their own terms. 133 134 135 136 137 138 139. Property rights. Main article, Property rights, economics. While there is debate on whether right libertarianism and left libertarianism or socialist libertarianism represent distinct ideologies as opposed to variations on a theme, right libertarianism is most in favor of capitalist private property and property rights. 140. Right libertarians maintain that unowned natural resources may be appropriated by the first person who discovers them, mixes his labor with them, or merely claims them, without the consent of others, and with little or no payment to them. This contrasts with left libertarianism in which unappropriated natural resources belong to everyone in some egalitarian manner. 141. Right libertarians believe that natural resources are originally unowned and therefore private parties may appropriate them at will without the consent of, or owing to, others, for example a land value tax. 142. Right libertarians are also referred to as propertarians because they hold that societies in which private property rights are enforced are the only ones that are both ethical and lead to the best possible outcomes. 143. They generally support free market capitalism and are not opposed to any concentrations of economic power, provided it occurs through non-coercive means. 144. This has been criticized because the holders of large amounts of property have great power to dictate the terms upon which others work for them and thus in effect the power to force others to be resources for them. 6 State main articles, Anarcho-capitalism and Night Watchman. State anarchy, State, and Utopia, 1974, A book by philosopher Robert Nozick arguing for a minimal state. There is a debate amongst right libertarians as to whether or not the state is legitimate. While anarcho-capitalists advocate its abolition, minarchists support minimal states, often referred to as night watchman states. Minarchists maintain that the state is necessary for the protection of individuals from aggression, breach of contract, fraud and theft. They believe the only legitimate governmental institutions are courts, military and police, although some expand this list to include the executive and legislative branches, fire departments and prisons. These minarchists justify the state on the grounds that it is the logical consequence of adhering to the non-aggression principle. 145, 146, 147. Some minarchists argue that a state is inevitable, believing anarchy to be futile. 148. Others argue that anarchy is immoral because it implies that the non-aggression principle is optional and not sufficient to enforce the non-aggression principle because the enforcement of laws under anarchy is open to competition. 149. Another common justification is that private defense agencies and court firms would tend to represent the interests of those who pay them enough. 150. Right libertarians, such as anarcho-capitalists, argue that the state violates the non-aggression principle by its nature because governments use force against those who have not stolen or vandalized private property, assaulted anyone, or committed fraud. 151. 152. Others argue that monopolies tend to be corrupt and inefficient and that private defense and court agencies would have to have a good reputation in order to stay in business. Linda and Morris Stanhill argue that no coercive monopoly of force can arise on a truly free market and that a government's citizenry can desert them in favor of a competent protection and defense agency. 153. Philosopher Moshe Croy argues that the disagreement between anarcho-capitalists who adhere to Murray Rothbard's view of human consciousness and the nature of values and minarchists who adhere to Ayn Rand's view of human consciousness and the nature of values over whether or not the state is moral is not due to a disagreement over the correct interpretation of a mutually held ethical stance. He argues that the disagreement between these two groups is instead the result of their disagreement over the nature of human consciousness and that each group is making the correct interpretation of their differing premises. According to Croy, these two groups are not making any errors with respect to deducing the correct interpretation of any ethical stance because they do not hold the same ethical stance. 154. Taxation as theft. Main article. Taxation as theft. The idea of taxation as theft is a viewpoint found in a number of political philosophies. Under this view, government transgresses property rights by enforcing compulsory tax collection. 155. 156. Right libertarians see taxation as a violation of the non-aggression principle. 157. Schools of thought. Anarcho-capitalism. Main article. Anarcho-capitalism. Murray Rothbard. Anarcho-capitalism advocates the elimination of the state in favor of individual sovereignty in a free market capitalism. 158. 159. 160. In an anarcho-capitalist society, courts, law enforcement and all other security services would be provided by privately funded competitors rather than through taxation, and money would be privately and competitively provided in an open market. 161. As a result, personal and economic activities under anarcho-capitalism would be regulated by privately run law rather than through politics. 162. The most well-known version of anarcho-capitalism was formulated in the mid-20th century by Austrian school economist and paleo-libertarian Murray Rothbard. Rothbard coined the term and is widely regarded as its founder. He combined the free market approach from the Austrian school with the human rights views and a rejection of the state he learned from 19th century American individualist anarchists such as Lysander Spooner and Benjamin Tucker, although he rejected their anti-capitalism, along with the labor theory of value and the normative implications they derived from it. 163. In Rothbardian anarcho-capitalism, There would first be the implementation of a mutually agreed upon libertarian legal code which would be generally accepted and which the courts would pledge themselves to follow. This legal code would recognize sovereignty of the individual and the principle of non-aggression. 164. Many writers deny that anarcho-capitalism is a form of anarchism at all, or that capitalism itself is compatible with anarchism, regarding it instead as right libertarian. 237 Conservative Libertarianism. Main article, Conservative Libertarianism. See also, Fusionism. Hans Hermann Hoppe. Conservative Libertarianism combines laissez-faire economics and conservative values. It advocates the greatest possible economic liberty and the least possible government regulation of social life whilst harnessing this to traditionalist conservatism, emphasizing authority and duty. 165 Conservative Libertarianism prioritizes liberty as its main emphasis, promoting free expression, freedom of choice and laissez-faire capitalism to achieve cultural and social conservative ends whilst rejecting liberal social engineering. 166. This can also be understood as promoting civil society through conservative institutions and authority such as education, family, fatherland and religion in the quest of libertarian ends for less state power. 167 In the United States, conservative libertarianism combines conservatism and libertarianism, representing the conservative wing of libertarianism and vice versa. Fusionism combines traditionalist and social conservatism with laissez-faire economics. 168. This is most closely associated with Frank Meyer. 169 Minarchism. Main article, Minarchism within right libertarian philosophy. Minarchism. 170, is supportive of a night watchman state, a model of a state whose only functions are to provide its citizens with courts, military and police, protecting them from aggression, breach of contract, fraud and theft whilst enforcing property laws. 145 146 147 19th century Britain has been described by historian Charles Townshend as standard-bearer of this form of government among European countries. 171 As a term, night watchman state, German, Nachtwächterstaat, was coined by German socialist Ferdinand Lassalle, an advocate of social democratic state socialism, to criticize the bourgeois state. 172 Austrian school economist Ludwig von Mises, a classical liberal who greatly influenced right libertarianism, later opined that Lassalle tried to make limited government look ridiculous, but that it was no more ridiculous than governments that concerned themselves with the preparation of sauerkraut, with the manufacture of trouser buttons, or with the publication of newspapers. 173 Robert Nozick, a right libertarian advocate of minarchism, received a National Book Award in category Philosophy and Religion for his book Anarchy, State, and Utopia, 1974, 174, where he argued that only a minimal state limited to the narrow functions of protection against force, fraud, theft, and administering courts of law could be justified without violating people's rights. 175 176 Neoclassical liberalism, not to be confused with neoclassical liberalism. See also, classical liberalism and neoliberalism. Friedrich Hayek. Traditionally, liberalism's primary emphasis was placed on securing the freedom of the individual by limiting the power of the government and maximizing the power of free market forces. As a political philosophy, it advocated civil liberties under the rule of law, with an emphasis on economic freedom. Closely related to economic liberalism, it developed in the early 19th century, emerging as a response to urbanization and to the Industrial Revolution in Europe and the United States. 177 178 179 180. It advocated a limited government and held a belief in laissez-faire economic policy. 181 182 183 built on ideas that had already arisen by the end of the 18th century, such as selected ideas of John Locke. 184, Adam Smith, Thomas Robert Malthus, Jean-Baptiste Say and David Ricardo, It drew on classical economics and economic ideas as espoused by Smith in The Wealth of Nations and stressed the belief in progress. 185, natural law 186, and utilitarianism. 187, these liberals were more suspicious than conservatives of all but the most minimal government and adopted Thomas Hobbes's theory of government, believing government had been created by individuals to protect themselves from one another. 188, the term classical liberalism was applied in retrospect to distinguish earlier 19th century liberalism from the newer social liberalism. 189, neoliberalism emerged in the era following World War II, during which social liberalism was the mainstream form of liberalism while Keynesianism and social democracy were the dominant ideologies in the Western world. It was led by economists such as Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman. 190, who advocated the reduction of the state and a return to classical liberalism, hence the term neoclassical liberalism. However, it did accept some aspects of social liberalism such as some degree of welfare provision by the state, but on a greatly reduced scale. Hayek and Friedman used the term classical liberalism to refer to their ideas, but others used the term to refer to all liberalism before the 20th century. Not to designate any particular set of political views and therefore see all modern developments as being by definition not classical. 29. Right libertarianism has been influenced by these schools of liberalism. It has been commonly referred to as a continuation or radicalization of classical liberalism. 29, 105, 106, 191, and referred to as neoclassical liberalism. 192. Neolibertarianism. Main article. Neolibertarianism. A concept of neolibertarianism gained a small following in the mid-2000s. 193, among right-leaning commentators who distinguished themselves from neoconservatives by their support for individual liberties. 194, and from libertarians by their support for foreign interventionism. 193. Paleolibertarianism. Main article. Paleolibertarianism. Lew Rockwell. Paleolibertarianism was developed by American libertarian theorists Murray Rothbard and Lew Rockwell. Combining conservative cultural values and social philosophy with a libertarian opposition to government intervention. 195. It overlaps with paleoconservatism. 196, 197. In the United States, paleolibertarianism is a controversial current due its connections to the alt-right. 198, 199, 200, and the Tea Party movement. 201, 202. Besides their anti-gun control stance in regard to gun laws and politics in support of the right to keep and bear arms, these movements, especially the old right and paleoconservatism, are united by an anti-leftist stance. 196, 203, in the essay Right-Wing Populism, a Strategy for the Paleo Movement, Rothbard reflected on the ability of paleo-libertarians to engage in an outreach to rednecks founded on libertarianism and social conservatism. 204, he cited former Louisiana State Representative David Duke and former United States Senator Joseph McCarthy as models for the new movement. 197. In Europe, paleolibertarianism has some significant overlap with right-wing populism. Former European Union parliamentarian Janis Corwin-Mikke from Corwin supports both laissez-faire economics and anti-immigration and anti-feminist positions. 205, 206, 207. Propertarianism. Main article. Propertarianism advocates the replacement of states with contractual relationships. Propertarian ideals are most commonly cited to advocate for a state or other governance body whose main or only job is to enforce contracts and private property. 208, 209. Propertarianism is generally considered right libertarian because it reduces all human rights to rights of property, beginning with the natural right of self-ownership. 210. As a term, propertarian appears to have been coined in 1963 by Edward Gain, who wrote, Since their use of the word liberty refers almost exclusively to property, it would be helpful if we had some other word, such as propertarian, to describe them. Novelist Ayn Rand is not a conservative at all but claims to be very relevant. She is a radical capitalist, and is the closest to what I mean by a propertarian. 211 By country. Since the 1970s, right libertarianism has spread beyond the United States. 58-59, with the foundation of the Libertarian Party in 1971, 212-213, many countries followed the example and led to the creation of libertarian parties advocating this type of libertarianism, along with classical liberalism, economic liberalism and neoliberalism, around the world, including Britain, 214. Israel 215, 216, 217, 218, and South Africa 219. Internationally, the majority of those libertarian parties are grouped within the International Alliance of Libertarian Parties. 220, 221, 222, 223. There also exists the European Party for Individual Liberty at the European level. 224 United Kingdom. In the United Kingdom, right libertarianism emerged and became more prominent in British politics after the 1980s neoliberalism and the economic liberalism of the premiership of Margaret Thatcher, albeit not as prominent as in the United States during the 1970s and the presidency of Republican Ronald Reagan during the 1980s. 225 prominent British right libertarians include former director of the Libertarian Alliance Sean Gabb and philosopher Stephen R. L. Clark, who are seen as rightists. Gabb has called himself a man of the right, 226, and Clark self-identifies as an anarcho-conservative. 227-228, Gabb has also articulated a libertarian defense of the British Empire. 229, at the same time, Gabb has given a generally appreciative commentary of left libertarian Kevin Carson's work on organization theory. 230, and Clark has supported animal rights, gender inclusiveness and non-judgmental attitude towards some unconventional sexual arrangements. 231, 232, 233, 234. Apart from the Libertarian Party, there is also a right libertarian faction of the mainstream Conservative Party that espouses Thatcherism. 235 United States Austrian school economists which greatly influenced the development of right libertarianism in the United States. Right libertarianism is the dominant form and better-known version of libertarianism in the United States. 414, especially when compared with left libertarianism. 15. Robert Nozick and Murray Rothbard have been described as the most noted advocate of this type of libertarianism. 237, unlike Rothbard, who argued for the abolition of the state. 236, Nozick argued for a night watchman state. 174. To this day, there remains a division between anarcho-capitalists that advocate its abolition and minarchists who support a night watchman state. 3. According to Nozick, only such a minimal state could be justified without violating people's rights. Nozick argued that a night watchman state provides a framework that allows for any political system that respects fundamental individual rights and therefore morally justifies the existence of a state. 175-176. Already a radical classical liberal and anti-interventionist strongly influenced by the old right, especially its opposition to the managerial state whilst being more unequivocally anti-war and anti-imperialist. 237, Rothbard had become the dawn of right libertarianism. 238-239, before his departure from the New Left, with which he helped build for a few years a relationship with other libertarians, Rothbard considered liberalism and libertarianism to be left-wing, radical and revolutionary, whereas conservatism to be right-wing, reactionary and counter-revolutionary. As for socialism, especially state socialism, Rothbard argued that it was not the opposite of libertarianism, but rather that it pursued liberal ends through conservative means, putting it in the political center. 240–241. By the time of his death in 1995, 242, Rothbard had involved the segment of the libertarian movement loyal to him in an alliance with the growing paleoconservative movement, seen by many observers, libertarian and otherwise, as flirting with racism and social reaction. 243–244, suggesting that libertarians needed a new cultural profile that would make them more acceptable to socially and culturally conservative people. Rothbard criticized the tendency of proponents of libertarianism to appeal to free spirits, to people who don't want to push other people around, and who don't want to be pushed around themselves, in contrast to the bulk of Americans, who might well be tight-assed conformists, who want to stamp out drugs in their vicinity, kick out people with strange dress habits, etc., while emphasizing that this was relevant as a matter of strategy. Rothbard argued that the failure to pitch the libertarian message to Middle America might result in the loss of the tight-assed majority. 245. Jeffrey Tucker, at least partly reflective of some of the social and cultural concerns that lay beneath Rothbard's outreach to paleoconservatives, is paleolibertarianism. 246. In an early statement of this position, Lew Rockwell and Jeffrey Tucker arguing for a specifically Christian libertarianism. 97. Later, Rockwell would no longer consider himself a paleo-libertarian and was happy with the term libertarian. 247. While distancing himself from the paleo-libertarian alliance strategy, Rockwell affirmed paleoconservatives for their work on the immigration issue, maintaining that porous borders in Texas and California could be seen as reducing liberty, not increasing it, through a form of publicly subsidized right to trespass. 248. Hans Hermann Hoppe argues that libertarians must be conservatives. 249. Hoppe acknowledges what he describes as the importance, under clearly stated circumstances, of discriminating against communists, Democrats, and habitual advocates of alternative, non-family-centered lifestyles, including homosexuals. 250–251. Contra Walter Block 252, and arguing that libertarianism need not be seen as requiring open borders. 253. Hoppe attributes open border enthusiasm to egalitarianism. 254. While defending market anarchy in preference to both, Hoppe has argued for the superiority of monarchy to democracy, maintaining that monarchs are likely to be better stewards of the territory they claim to own than democratic politicians, whose time horizons may be shorter. 255. Defending the fusion of traditionalist conservatism with libertarianism and rejecting the view that libertarianism means support for a liberal culture, Edward Fesser implies that a central issue for those who share his viewpoint is the preservation of traditional morality, particularly traditional sexual morality, with its idealization of marriage and its insistence that sexual activity be confined within the bounds of that institution, but also a general emphasis on dignity and temperance over self-indulgence and dissolute living. 256. Walter Block identifies Fesser, Hoppe and Ron Paul as right libertarians. 46. Rothbard's outreach to conservatives was partly triggered by his perception of negative reactions within the Libertarian Party to 1988 presidential nominee Ron Paul because of Paul's conservative appearance and his discomfort with abortion. Nonetheless, Paul himself did not make cultural issues central to his public persona during his 2008 and 2012 presidential campaigns for the Republican presidential nomination, and focused on a simple message of support for personal freedom and civil liberties, commitment to fiscal discipline and opposition to war. 257. Although he did continue to take what some regarded as a conservative position regarding immigration, arguing for some restrictions on cross-border freedom of movement. 258. Paul's fellow libertarian anti-militarist Justin Raimondo, a co-founder of antiwar.com, has described himself as a conservative paleo-libertarian. Unlike Feza and Rockwell, Raimundo's Reclaiming the American Right argues for a resurgence of old right political attitudes, and it does not focus on the social and cultural issues that are of central importance to Feza and Rockwell. 259.